Welcome to the Who's Left podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from the unapologetic perspective of the Hoosier left. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I'm recording from Bloomington. So, folks, if I find myself canceled after this episode, it's been a real pleasure talking with all of you for the last year. But I think it's important we step into this eggshell-covered minefield that is the Israel-Palestine situation for a few reasons. First of all, this is the dominant story in the news, and it has topped the headlines for 2 months, and we should talk about it. Additionally, our government's response, in particular President Biden's response, has resulted in his poll numbers taking a huge hit and may very well wind up giving us a second Trump turn, which would not be good for Palestinians, Jews, or anybody. But most of all, I think we need to talk about it because the way it has been talked about, particularly in the mainstream media, has not been good. It's a delicate situation. It requires nuance, and for us to dispense with black and white thinking. We can say that we condemn Hamas and terrorism and the October 7th attack and still say we condemn the Israeli response and the indiscriminate bombing that has resulted in the death of nearly 18,000 Palestinians, half of whom are children. We can criticize the Israeli government and still reaffirm that Israel has a right to exist, that the Jewish people have a right to a homeland in their ancestral home where they can feel safe and secure and live in peace. These are not contradictory statements, and it shouldn't be difficult. Now, the mainstream media has been completely guilty of malpractice. Both print and broadcast journalism have used dehumanizing language toward Palestinians. Accusations of anti-Semitism are rampant without much thought to the increase in anti-Islamic sentiment as well. Much has been made about the phrase, "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." It resulted in Congress censuring Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian American in Congress, for her use of the phrase, whereas the Republican insurrectionists didn't so much as even get a slap on the wrist after trying to overthrow the government. And that also ignores that Benjamin Netanyahu's own Likud party uses the same "from the river to the sea" language in favor of Israeli-only sovereignty. And university presidents are getting hauled before Congress for allowing pro-Palestinian rallies on their campuses, even when these rallies are oftentimes sponsored by Jewish Voices for Peace. It's like anything short of 100% unequivocal support of the far-right Israeli government's position makes you a raging anti-Semite. I think the media's biggest sin here has been the lack of proper historical perspective, as if the terrorist attacks of October 7th are the beginning of this conflict. And for anybody who's even been half awake at any point in the last 75 years, you know this conflict has a lot of history. I want to direct you, my listeners, to a couple other podcasts that I think have done a really good job of diving into the history here. First, The Dig from Jacobin Magazine has done several episodes on Israel and Palestine recently, speaking to both Arab and Jewish scholars. And I also want to point you to one of my new favorite podcasts, Unfucking the Republic. Their 3-part series on Israel-Palestine is mandatory listening for anybody who wants to get caught up on this situation. I will link to all that in the show notes. So, where do you want to start the clock, I guess? If history didn't start on October 7th, do you want to look at 16 years ago? That's how long Gaza's been under siege. The Israeli government controls all movement in and out of people and goods to the territory. Do you want to rewind to 1995 and the peace process and the Oslo Accords being throttled by the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin by one of his own people, an extremist, radical ultra-Zionist? Do you want to roll back to the First Intifada and the formation of Hamas and their use of suicide bombings in the late 80s and early 90s? Do you want to go to the formation of the Likud party in Israel in the 70s, and they're moving the Israeli government farther to the right than it had ever been before, including their 1982 invasion of Lebanon? Do you want to start the clock with the 1973 Yom Kippur War, which was begun by the Arab states? Or the 1967 Six Days War, which the Israeli armed forces started, and they still hold much of the territory they captured in that war to this day? Do you want to start the clock in 1956 with the Suez Canal crisis? Do you want to start it with the foundation of the Israeli state in 1948? Because even that isn't the beginning of this conflict, right? You know, you could rewind all the way to the 1890s when the Zionist movement first began as a response to persecution of the Jewish people in Eastern Europe and Russia. And there was a small Jewish population in Ottoman Palestine at that time, and Jews and Muslims and Christians and all lived in that area peacefully coexisted, but the Ottomans found themselves on the wrong side of the First World War, and afterwards the Allies carved up their territory. The British and the French went in there, drew lines on the map, didn't really consult with the local people if they would make sense, and that's what it was. So the British held a mandate over Palestine between the world wars. And in this period, you start to see a little bit more Jewish immigration to Palestine. Certainly after the Nazis come to power in Germany and enact the Nuremberg laws, you see even more and more immigration. And, there are scuffles between Jews and Palestinians at this point. These are ongoing. After World War II, when the full scope of the horror of the Nazis' Holocaust was apparent, it became obvious that the Jewish people needed a homeland of their own where they could be safe and secure. And the British were still in charge in Palestine, and it wasn't exactly theirs to give away, right? You can't make up for the horrors of the Holocaust with the Nakba, right? You cannot make up for one catastrophe with another catastrophe. And from the outside, it looks like two groups of hurting people, inflicting their generational trauma on their neighbors, and so on. and so on, and so on, generation after generation. I guess it doesn't matter who is at fault, as it were. Ceasefire now. Now, for all the pain and suffering these peoples have both endured in their ancestral lands, both Jewish and Palestinian Americans add diversity to the social fabric of America. Today, I am bringing on a Palestinian American voice because I feel they've been upper or underrepresented in mainstream discourse. But please, for my Jewish listeners, reach out. Tell me, am I wrong here? Help me understand. Before we get to my interview today, I do want to request your support. The best way to help the program financially is to subscribe at the paid level over at scottaaronrogers.substack.com. While you're there, you can also find my essays and campaign finance research. Additionally, please rate and review the podcast if your podcast player allows you to do so. But the most important thing you can do is to share this with another Hoosier. We are all stuck here in red state hell together. Let us be in community, in solidarity. Again, thank you for your support. Here's my interview with Noor Hussein. Noor Hussein, welcome to the Who's Left podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So, you are coming to us from Los Angeles, California.
Yes.
This is a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us your Hoosier cred.
Well, as in like my little background.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where are you from?
So I was born in Chicago, but I was raised in South Bend, Indiana. And then I went to IU for school. I was there for about 5 years. And then when I finished my degree, I went to Indianapolis where I lived for about 2 years. And then, which I got a job that had nothing to do with my field. And then I fortunately got laid off because of the recession or whatever, whatever we're in. And I moved to LA right after.
Well, that's quite a jump. But so who lifelong Hoosier until the last several months. But
absolutely.
Once a Hoosier, always a Hoosier, right?
Oh, for sure. Everyone can tell I'm from the Midwest here. So
yeah, it's weird. It's like here you don't know that you have an accent until you go somewhere else, right?
Yeah, and just I guess I'm just a lot nicer than people here. So my manners, and some of the stuff that I say, like and just funny term.
The ope is always a dead giveaway, right?
Yeah.
Did your sister go to Purdue? Is that right?
Oh yeah, she did. We graduated the same year too, and our graduation was on the same day too, which was kind of funny.
The logistics of that had to be a bit tricky.
Yeah, it was funny. But yeah, she went to Purdue, and she then went to Boston for grad school, and now she's back in Indiana, in Indianapolis.
Wow, awesome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So couple Hoosier girls, growing up doing her Hoosier stuff, like all American family. Tell us about your family. Like, you are of Palestinian descent, correct?
Correct.
How did your family come to be here?
So, well, my grandparents were both born in Palestine, but during the occupation and just the raiding of the villages, they were forced to leave. So my mom's side ended up going to Kuwait, and then my dad's side went to Jordan, and then my both family ended up moving to Jordan. That's how they got, they were neighbors, ended up getting married. Shortly after they got married, they moved to the United States at 19, so not speaking any English, only having one family member here. And they moved to Chicago, out of all places, and it was just too much for my family. So we ended up having like a great aunt or something, or a great uncle in Indiana, in South Bend, who was like, you should come here. It's a lot quieter, easier to have a family. There's a Muslim community here. It was smaller at the time, but it was still like, because my parents still wanted that because like in Chicago, there's a huge Arab Muslim community. So they were kind of
Yeah.
worried that they wouldn't have that kind of like community in Indiana, but they did. And it's only growing now. And now 25 years later, they're still in South Bend. Um, yeah, I went to yeah, and I got to go to Palestine for the first time like 5 years ago, which was really nice.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Mhm.
So like what year was it about when your parents or well your family, your grandparents, you said, when did they leave Palestine?
So they left around I believe the 70s, like 60s and 70s. So I know my like
Okay.
grandfather, they were both 16 at the time. So and he was born in like the 1940s. So yeah, I think just about like the 1960s, 1970s.
He must have seen a lot.
Yeah, especially because I think I remember him telling me the story about how like they had to walk on foot and how like he lost his brother in the process, and how I mean they also lost his dad at the time, not because of the Israel forces or anything, but just because of I don't know, illness. So yeah, and then they moved from like Syria, and I think they tried to go to Turkey, but that didn't work. So they went to Kuwait, and then then they found their ways back to Jordan. But my dad's side actually, they ended up moving to Puerto Rico because there was a huge Palestinian community there. I don't know how or why, but yeah, my dad
Huh.
was
I
ended up
never knew
being
that.
born there. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Maybe it was like easier to get like citizenship or something, or maybe they are hosting refugees at the time. I probably should do more research about or ask my dad more about it. But yeah, so he ended up being raised in Puerto Rico for half of his life and then moving to Jordan.
Oh wow, man. Small world, eh?
Yeah.
Been around, yeah. That's so interesting. Um,
hmm
so your parents came here about when?
The 1997, like 1997, 1996.
97? Okay. Okay. And not a word of English, right? When they came over
Yeah.
here?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and my mom, I think they're like, both straight out of high school. My mom like decided to like learn English here. I think Indiana University in South Bend, they were offering like English as a second language classes. So I remember growing up, she would go to that and I would go to daycare. And I'd be learning English there or like some after school program, and she'd be at some after school program learning
Yeah.
English.
That's you were learning at the same time. That's kind of neat.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely made things a little difficult growing up just with like comprehension and stuff. But I mean, I'm grateful to have like Arabic as my first language too, because, thankfully my parents still talk to me in Arabic at home.
Yeah, I wish I could speak a second language. I tried several. I just if you don't like immerse yourself with it's so hard.
Absolutely.
And not enough Americans do speak a second language. Yeah, totally guilty.
hmm
But I mean, that's an amazing story that your parents come over here and here, 25 some years later, two girls went through college, one to
hmm
grad school. Like
hmm
that's the American dream, right?
Absolutely.
Um, so even with that, like all American girl, right? Like, do you ever get shit for I don't know being Muslim or Arab or Palestinian or
Well,
just brown in general? Because Americans are not often discerning.
I mean, I guess it'd be like, where would you want me to start? I mean, especially being raised in Indiana, there's a lot of ignorance. I mean, thankfully, I was raised in South Bend, and then I went to school in Bloomington. So those were the only, not that there's a much association, but they were the only blue counties in Indiana at the time, I believe. So it's like there's a little bit more, a little bit less racism, I would say, that I experienced. But I mean, I remember like, because my mom wears a hijab and so does my sister. And so they're
Mhm.
visibly Muslim. So, they definitely receive a lot more, just Islamophobia, like comments and whatever. I mean, did get them growing up, especially because my last name is Hussein. So like I've just
Yeah,
had
yeah,
heard it all. And I mean, even still as an adult, like, people who are, I thought it would get better as I'm older, but people still, especially when they see my name. I mean, that's the only like concern that I usually get. And then being Palestinian was never an issue. It was always just, oh, I'm Muslim or I'm Arab. So like that was like what I was, basically being antagonized for. But here in LA, like no one could care less that I'm Muslim or Arab. They care
yeah,
that I'm
right.
Palestinian. Like they
Hmm.
would rather me be Muslim and Arab from somewhere else. But as soon as Palestinians brought up, it's a completely different conversation. That's when people tell me, oh, Palestine doesn't exist, or they tell me that you're not Palestinian because your parents weren't born there, blah, blah, blah. So,
Wow. Yeah,
mhm.
that's not great. Um, wow. So, is this just in the last month or so since things have started to be like that? Or did you get a hard time specifically
well,
over the Palestine issue before?
well, the Palestine became started to become an issue for me was when I was at IU because I was in a sorority for a moment, and I just didn't know that a lot of the sororities there had it's like a lot of pro-Israel students there. There's students who wear the IDF sweatshirts there and stuff like that. And I remember I
Oh wow.
was in my chapter meeting and they were like, "Who wants a free trip to Israel?" And I was like, "I'm Palestinian. Do I count?" And like I got blocked, unfollowed, and that was like didn't I didn't get half of the
Wow.
girls didn't talk to me. So I was like, "Ooh, this is bad." And then another time it was my birthday, and this friend was introducing me to another friend. I was like, "Oh, I'm from Palestine." He was like, "Do you mean Israel?" And I was like, "No, I'm from Palestine." And he's like, "Well, I went to Israel and blah, blah, blah." And like, so fast forward, didn't really have a problem with it. And then came here and I just didn't know this was like I think the most like second most pro-Israel city in the US after New York. So very shocked when I was telling people Palestinian, like I've had two people tell me like, "Oh, Palestine does not exist. You mean Israel." So well, it's very condescending for
Well, yeah,
sure.
that's like the first place they go. Hi, nice to meet you. Your homeland doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Um, yeah, it's so I'm really sorry that you have to deal with that. That really stinks.
No, it's okay.
Um, Everywhere is seems like it's bad and contentious, like in any kind of social space right now. Social media is a zoo. Um, there's just so much black and white thinking, you know, red team, blue team, good and evil, no nuance. And
Mhm.
I don't know how you say in so many words, like, yes, obviously, Hamas and what they did on October 7th are terrible and they don't represent all the Palestinian people, just as the Israeli government, which, is a coalition of like far right ultra Zionists currently, they're not representative of all Jews certainly, or even all Israelis.
Yeah.
Um, and why is it so hard to be on like team killing innocent people is bad?
Well, the issue is like, well, you saw how, I mean, I don't know if you saw this, but a couple years ago, Hillary Clinton had tweeted, bombing hospitals is a war crime. And I think they were talking about Ukraine, and like that
Mm-hmm.
needs to end. But, as soon as Palestinian hospitals have been bombed, multiple of them, refugee camps bombed, it's just like we're completely dehumanized. And that's the issue. So Arabs and Muslims are
Yeah.
seen as animals in the Western media. So anything that happens to us, it's very hard for people to sympathize with us. I mean, that's why when you hear little kids talking on stands or speaking in English, because they know that if they're speaking in Arabic, people are going to look at them and think that we're animals. So we have to they have to speak in English so that, Western media can sympathize with them. But, unfortunately, like, post 9/11 and just with all the Islamophobia and like the misleading titles on news state, like on BBC and CNN, whatever, Fox, all those, whatever, any corrupt news station there is, like they also play a huge role. Like when they talk about Palestinians dying, I forgot like the word choice. They don't even say kids. They say 18 and under. But when they talk about Israel, they say children. And they're talking about the same demographics. So that's the issue. It's like the media is just doing such a good job just making it seem like it's not as bad as it seems. Like 20,000 people have killed, and what's the percentage of Hamas being killed? Like, I want to know the number. They're all innocent civilians. So, and and October 7th, obviously, like completely terrible to do, like complete terrible thing to happen. But the issue I have with that is that they made so many lies about it too. Like they didn't show any proof. They kept like, they told one dad that his daughter had died, and then when the release hostage had happened, they found that his daughter was alive. So it's like there's just so much propaganda. It's kind of like, where's the truth? Biden was like, oh, 5,000 people didn't die. So the Palestinian minute, what did Palestine do? They created like an official document with 221 pages of the people who have died. And that was a month ago, where the numbers have tripled already. So It is black and white, but people are choosing not to make it black and white because they're either ignorant, they don't want to take the time to do their own research. I've had so many conversations with people and they just don't want to listen. Like they're already so just stuck or brainwashed, or I don't even know what the word is, on their ways. They don't even want to have a conversation. It's like, but what about this? Like every time I talk about Palestine, they're like, what about Hamas? What about October 7th? I'm like, what about the 75 years of occupation? Like what, let's talk about why Hamas is also created. 70% of them are orphans. You know why? Because all their parents were, killed. And unfortunately, also Hamas was voted back in the early, and Hamas was also voted for back in the early 2000s. And 40% of Palestine was able to vote. And those 40% are probably not even alive 20 years later. So it's like they never even had a real life.
Oh, I've heard some say that there are no innocent Palestinians. They voted for Hamas. Like, bro, that was 17 years ago. There hasn't been a vote since. Like half of everybody there are children under 18. They weren't even born last time there was a free election.
Absolutely. Yeah. So.
And yeah. And I can understand, I guess, why a lot of people in this country may, feel that it be one-sided and make it hard to budge, because you do really only get one side of the story a lot. You were talking about the dehumanizing language. I feel like the media is great at, taking a camera and zooming in and telling you what's going on now, but they're not really good at context, and they're even worse at history.
Yeah, I mean, no one knows that. Like, I mean, I need to brush up on it more, but it like started way before 1947, which is crazy. And people like, if you're really educated, that it starts before then. And just, I don't know, it's just a lot of it's a lot of history, and just a lot of it just takes a lot of people just to Google it. I mean, that's the issue. Like, people don't want to take the time to just Google information. But also social media has been censoring like my posts and a lot of my Palestinian like friends stuff too. So I usually on Instagram get like 800 views minimum. Ever since I started posting about Palestine, I barely get 200. And so many people go through this. Like, there's a famous artist named Kalani. She has like millions of followers. She says she used to get like 400,000 views. She's been so pro-Palestine that she barely gets 100,000. So, we're also being shadow banned. And, that like when we are trying to show the real information, I get yeah, or Instagram takes down my post saying I'm going against community guidelines and I'm supporting a terrorist attack. It's like, no, I'm just really talking about what's going on in Palestine. So it's like we're trying our best to fight the media, but they have so much control, and like social media has also control over what we can share too. So it's really hard.
Yeah, well, you know, a certain segment of the Israeli far right have done a good job convincing people that um, anything that isn't complete support for what the state of Israel does is anti-Semitism.
Which is crazy because if you literally look up the definition of Semitism or whatever, it's literally Aramaic, Arab, and Hebrew. So how am I anti-Semitic
Yes.
against my own self? And people would love to just completely take, Arabs out of that equation. So it's like, if you really want to talk about being anti-Semitic, y'all are being anti-Semitic towards Palestinian Arabs, so it's, I mean, but that word's been thrown out like so easily. It's disgusting. Like, people will say that, oh, my family was killed by the idea. Oh, you're anti-Semitic. I'm from Palestine. I'll just say I'm from Palestine. You're being anti-Semitic. Like, it's insane. Like, that word gets thrown out so easy because it has so much power and control here, especially, yeah, especially in LA here, where you're seeing all these actors being, you know, dropped from their whatever. And then you have people have, like, what's that guy, Noah Schnapp or whatever? I don't even know. He's off of Stranger Things. He was talking about how he was like, Zionism is sexy, like kill all Palestinians. And he still has a job. But you have that lead
Oh,
actress,
damn, what?
and yeah, there's videos of him saying it. And there's like a lead actress of Scream says, I stand with Palestinians. She gets completely dropped. Nothing anti-Semitic, just basically standing up for human rights. So my issue with that word is that I totally, I sympathize with people who are being anti-Semitic. I don't want anyone to hate Jews or whatever. But to use that word to just what's the word? I don't know. Just use that as a
It's a
way
shield
to
against like any valid criticism.
absolutely. Yeah, it's a shield. And people are taking it and running away with it.
Yeah, like you should be able to say that um, uh, killing civilians is bad. Killing innocent Palestinians is bad. Killing children is bad. You should be able to say that.
I'm
You should be able to call
absolutely.
for a ceasefire and not be accused of being some anti-Semitic monster.
People talk about Saudi Arabia. You don't hear people calling them they're Islamophobic. People talk about other countries like, oh, that they're not doing something right. No one gets called anything for them because it's not about that. It's just like recognizing that the government is doing something that's not right. Like, and that's what it is. It's like no one's bringing the religion into it. Like it could have, if it was like it could have been like a Christian or like Christian religion doing to us, or another Muslim, like whatever, whoever it would have been, it would have been the same issue. Like, stop ethnically cleansing the Palestinians. Like, it doesn't matter who was doing it. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah, no, it shouldn't be difficult or controversial in any way. Um, but yeah, like people don't understand that um, Muslims and Jews used to live side by side on that very land.
And
Like
yeah, literally peace.
probably a little more than 100 years ago. And then after World War I, Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire. The
Yep.
Ottomans were on the losing side, and the British and the French divided up the area. And whenever you get colonialism involved, and British guys who have no idea about the local customs and traditions and the facts on the ground and who this village and their religion and
Mm-hmm.
what they speak in this village and they just draw these lines arbitrarily. It's always been a mess. And
Mm-hmm.
we, over the latter half of the 20th century, we saw all of these places in Asia and Africa gain their independence from, their former colonial power. And it
Mm-hmm.
feels like the Palestinian people got hung out to dry. And now that's
Absolutely.
and that's not to say the Jewish people do not deserve a homeland where they can be safe from, the millennia of persecution they have faced. They absolutely do. Um, but in 1947, right, the UN partitioned the area into two states essentially, and
Mm-hmm.
things went to hell like the next year,
Mm-hmm.
and immediately on Israel's independence.
Yep.
And it was what Jordan and Egypt and Syria invaded, started a war with Israel, um, and in, that's their governments, that's their armies. It's not representative of all the people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like everybody is flattened, is not allowed to be fully a three-dimensional human person in this situation, and
Mm-hmm.
people are just like the Palestinians or the Arabs and the Jews, and there is no such thing as such the
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's so many individual people, such a range in any of those categories, and most of them are just lovely humans who want to get along with each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's a reason why prior to the 1940s, like Palestinian Christians and Palestinian Muslims and Jews all lived in peace. They were all neighbors. They all had each other watch their kids. They would have
Mm-hmm.
lunch together. Like you talk to people back, like, back then it used to be peace. And then, just one thing led to another. So,
Yeah, and so much of it is it's leftovers from empire, that
mm-hmm.
mess things up to this day. Like, what, Turkey and Iraq and the Kurds don't have their own state. And I, I don't know, if we rewind to like 1918 and redraw the lines where everybody can get along better, white people
I mean,
always
the
come and
U.S.
mess
also has
everything
a lot
up.
of influence on, listen, it's just, yeah, colonization and just money and greed and power and resources. I mean, that's what it's the base of all of, all these issues around the world, so the exploitation of
Yeah,
resources.
American
I mean,
capital.
Gaza is sitting on
Yeah,
Gaza's sitting on $millions or $billions worth of oil, and
I
Gazans are
just
not
heard
allowed to
something about that this earlier today.
yeah, and people in Gaza are not allowed to dig it up. You know who is? Israel, and that's their plan. They have a plan. They have everything written out. Like I wish I remember the name of the documents, but literally you can see how they have a plan to basically wipe out, the West Bank and Gaza and create it, create more, basically, occupy it and make it into more Israeli territories. But yeah, there's a bunch of oil there. So, and it's unfortunate that, the people of Gaza can't use it. And they're literally one of the most, like, they're so poor there that they could definitely use it. But,
Yeah, and eh, and the U.S. government's role in supporting Israel and essentially propping it up as a client state for the last 75, 80 years has so much to do with oil and having an outpost there in the Middle East, having an ally there. Um,
absolutely.
so there's certainly that like geopolitical chessboard factor kind of thing, right? But like the Christian far right in this country also has a weird thing for Israel, where they are convinced that if all of the world's Jews are returned to Israel, then Jesus will come back, and this will begin the Armageddon, and they act like, they're really pro-Israel, and until they get to the part where, like, you know what happens at the end. They have to accept Jesus or die. That doesn't seem very supportive to me.
Well, the reason why so many, and I actually just learned this too, and wish my memory was a lot better so I could, really like quote what I read. But I mean, back in the day, how do they pronounce evangelical churches? Well, Zionists used to go to those churches and talk to their pastors and basically bribe them into, the whole, like, teaching them the whole ideology that, Jews must return to their state, and that's Israel, blah, blah, blah. So that's why there's just so much influence too. It all started back in the day. Like, they're very smart people. Right? I don't know.
It was just a couple weeks ago, I think. There was a big pro-Israel rally in Washington, and one of the speakers there was John Hagee, who is like an ultra-right Christo-fascist preacher, and he's also one of these like ultra-Zionists, and that's why. And they shared the stage with it.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah.
I mean, just like our country has a far-right problem with Trumpism, Israel has a far-right problem with Netanyahu and his allies in power.
Yep.
And they're all aligned with like Putin and bin Salman and like the international kleptocratic oligarch mafia organization that is trying to undermine democracy everywhere.
No, literally, they're all mirroring each other, and it's insane that people are so blind to see that Netanyahu is literally, in my opinion, another Hitler.
He's
so
and
I mean, I think
great.
Go ahead.
He's not even the worst. Like Ben Gvir and some of the like the
was
far
that
right
the guy that
guys.
just died today? The guy that died today, who was in charge of Cambodia.
Kissinger.
Took him
Henry
100
Kissinger.
years.
Yeah, rotten hell, you bastard.
And that's why it took him so long to go. You knew where he was going.
But I don't know. I guess it's so disappointing that everybody is so flat. We were talking about like these mafia guys. Like Trump doesn't represent all Americans. Netanyahu doesn't represent all Israelis. He is very, very unpopular there right now. I think I saw it was like 4%. Last time they took a poll, but he needs this war to continue.
He doesn't care about the hostages.
To hang on to power. He needs to hang on to power, because the minute he's gone, he's going back to court because he's under indictment for like 3 felonies. Which, I mean, that's peanuts compared to how many Trump is facing. But a criminal's a criminal.
A war criminal, for sure. I mean, he's using collective punishment, and I'm pretty sure the United Nations declared that as, a war crime. But yeah, it's still okay to collectively punish all of Palestine.
Yeah, the UN has been pretty consistent and clear on their position, and
they're pretty useless.
It is good. They do not have much power to do anything. No,
absolutely.
Sadly, and
it's like, why do we
that
have
is because of the American far right.
Well, I mean, and you saw what they did to the Palestinian lady in the House. Like, she's the only Palestinian voice, and they told her that she needs to step down or something, or just she's not able to continue forward because she's considered anti-Semitic. But it's like she's the only Palestinian representation we have in the United States or whatever in the House of Congress or Senate. I don't know.
Yeah.
And yet they silenced her. And now if you're,
Right.
and I mean, you
There
saw how
were
they
what,
passed it.
150
Yeah.
Yeah, they censure one woman for standing up for what she believes is right, and 150 some congressmen on the Republican side just trying to overthrow the government a couple years ago, and I don't even think they so much as got censured.
Nope. Yeah.
So I guess it's good to see that there is a ceasefire or a pause or whatever they want to call it that's held for several days. There's been some hostage exchange, and that's fantastic. I understand that. Oh, well, yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry. I mean, it's not really it's a ceasefire, but they're attacking the West Bank right now, and they just murdered two, 4 teenagers yesterday and the day before. They shot a 9-year-old. Saw the video of that. They're just shooting kids left and right. They just stabbed a woman to death. So, I mean, yeah, it's a ceasefire, but also the release of Palestinian hostages. They're literally beating the living shit out of them. They're raping the women. They're not feeding them. They're not showering them. And these are all released statements from the hostages. And you have people commenting that they're lying. And then you saw the videos of the hostages released on the Hamas side, and they're literally shaking hands with them, flirting with each other, dabbing up, smiling, no source, no discomfort. They were literally talking about how they were taken care of. And they denied Netanyahu's visit because they know that he's just going to completely switch what they have to say and make it, whatever, so that the Hamas were the bad guys. But I mean, it's a ceasefire, but they're literally still killing people in the West Bank. So, and the hostages that they're releasing, they're literally beating the shit out of them, and they're not allowed to celebrate. They're not allowed to tell to people and tell them what's happening or what's happened to them. So a lot of people see this and they're happy, but as a Palestinian, I'm not happy about it because it's like 20,000 people had to die. Hostages are getting released, but they're getting beaten, raped, and threatened to not even celebrate the release. And they're all kids. It's like, why are we celebrating that? They're kids. No one, it's not towards you at all, but I'm just telling you, my perspective. It's like, it doesn't make me happy because there's no reason why there should be 8,000 kids held on without trial in Israel. And they also keep dead bodies after they have, until they are till they reach the end of their non-ending trial. So it's like, there's nothing really good about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I guess it's better than the alternative, but that's a pretty low bar to kill, or a pretty low bar to cross, to not.
And and they just they released, Israel just released 116 hostages from Palestine, and then they went to the West Bank and captured 117 more kids. So it's not fair, and unfortunately, the Palestinians aren't using this time to rest. They're using that time to mourn their family's death. They're using that time to find their families underneath the rubble. They're using that time to bury their kids, So there's really nothing good about this pause right now, So.
Yeah. I feel that. I do understand that a lot of people, certainly in the Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim communities in this country, and also largely on the left, we're very disappointed with the U.S. government's response and President Biden's response. And a lot of people apparently are saying, that
I mean, a lot of people,
the last straw, and they won't go vote for him next year.
I mean, we're honestly screwed for the next election. But I mean, he's an absolute worthless human being. I mean, he's not listening to his people. You see, I mean, you hear that. I mean, I'm not actually sure if you know, but just because it's like the media does such a good job of not showing the pro-Palestine rallies and protests, but you see the numbers at pro-Israel protests and pro-Palestine, like people of the United States, the majority is standing on the right side. The issues our president isn't listening, and he's just turning a side eye because they need Israel, they need an ally. And he said it 20 years ago, not 20, like 40 years ago in an interview. If Israel didn't exist, we would have to create one. Ha ha ha. I mean, like there's a reason why every president stands with them. There's a reason why Trump declared Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and took that away from Palestine in 2020. So they love Israel.
Yeah, I do understand that Biden has been putting a lot of pressure on Netanyahu and the Israeli government, like behind the scenes. It's a very tough geopolitical place for him, knowing he has to stick with that, pro-Israel consensus. Publicly and privately give these guys, what the hell? I guess what good does that do? Not much.
No, it's not fair, because if roles were reversed, if a Muslim country was doing what Netanyahu was doing, you know damn well the U.S. would have been there so quickly and blowing the fuck out of that Muslim country like they did in Iraq. So, so it's like, if it's just disgusting and dehumanizing, and it's just a really hard time being Palestinian today, just because they're really going through it. So,
do you have family or friends or people there?
Oh, absolutely. Friends in the West Bank, family friends in the West Bank. My mom, I thought I didn't have any family in the West Bank, but no, my mom's side still has family. They own little mini shops there. One of my friends posted on his Instagram the other day that there's like a lot of pages that report on what's going on in Palestine and the West Bank, and he saw his family's house get raided. He didn't even know it had happened. He saw it on that Instagram video. He said, "This is literally my family's home back home in the West Bank. I had no idea this was going on." I've had families who, my friends' families got wiped out in Gaza. So, I mean, there's only so many of us. And so we're all so close knit together too. So it's like, we all know people who have already lost people. One of my older friends, her husband is still being held hostage in Israel, in Palestine. He's without trial. They had no set date, she's been waiting for 10, 20 years. So we have it's insane. Yeah. So, I mean, fortunately, like, my immediate family hasn't been affected yet, but my friends and family friends, they're all mourning, and they're all trying to deal with it the best way that they can. And I mean, we all feel so stuck, and it's like we have survivor's guilt, and I just feel so helpless. And the fact that my tax dollar is supporting it too enrages me. Like, there's no reason why Indiana should be donating $12 million to Israel when there's potholes, when there's homeless people, when there's kids, when 1 out of 4 kids are hungry. So yeah, no, it's just, the whole situation's messed up. Yeah. And I mean, I voted for Biden, so it's like, not to put my politics out there. So I feel a little bit of responsible of what's happening. And it really, really breaks my heart knowing that I'm in a country where my money is literally killing and ethnically cleansing my people. And they want me to pay back my student loans? Hell no.
Girl, you hold out. You hold out. Boycott that shit.
I'd be like, this is for Palestine. Yeah.
Oh, well, Noor, I'm glad we could at least have a little laugh there at the end and not keep things
absolutely
so dark. Thank you.
No, of course, yeah.
So much for doing this. I really appreciate you really making this personal, putting a face to the struggle, and a
Yeah.
voice to the struggle, um, for our listeners here. A lot of people have a hard time imagining, like, people far away.
Mhm.
They're they're over there. But
Mhm.
once you know somebody personally, you know their story personally, it has a way of changing people's minds and changing people's hearts. And I we got a lot of minds and hearts to change still.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I appreciate you taking the time and having me on here and just, speaking, you know, just giving me the opportunity to speak about it and just being able to voice my opinion and just how I feel. I think it's also really important. I mean, yeah, and yeah, it's not every day where you know a Palestinian.
Everybody got to
So,
find at least one Palestinian friend, to make
yeah.
so they can know. Uh, well, Noor, thank you for being my Palestinian friend. That was my interview with my friend, Palestinian American Hoosier, Noor Hussein. You can really feel the anger, sadness, and frustration come through. And there were a lot of claims that both of us touched on in the interview, and I will fact check all those and include links in the show notes. A couple things I did want to address specifically regarding the treatment of the hostages. It's tough to find really good information out there. The Israeli government has been really tight about controlling it. The narrative, again, I will include a couple links. Also, the claim that most of Hamas are orphans. I cannot independently verify that, though. I found a couple things. I will include links. I cannot vouch for their accuracy, but the claim is out there. Everything else, even said in heat, appeared to be pretty true. But I want to return to one of the things that we talked about, and that is the reasons for the unequivocal American support for the Israeli government in this conflict. And the first thing we mentioned was the geopolitics of the Cold War and having an ally in the Middle East, access to uh, resources like oil and such. Uh, Also, I mentioned in passing the Christian end times fantasies tossed about in evangelical circles, which in basically states that all of the Jews will return to Israel and reestablish the temple there in Jerusalem, at which point Jesus will come to earth and force them all to convert or die, and then begin a reign of 1,000 years. It's crazy stuff. End times fantasies should not dictate foreign policy. I shouldn't have to say that. Um, but one thing we didn't get to that I want to reflect on a little bit here is the United States can't be critical of Israel without being critical of itself. And that it's like looking into a mirror and seeing your worst self peering back at you. We did settler colonialism well before the state of Israel was ever established. We know what it looks like to sign a treaty with a group of indigenous people and then break that treaty. We know what ethnic cleansing looks like. We did that. We recognize the state of segregation that exists. There are certain places that Palestinian people cannot go and Israeli citizens can go. We did that. That's segregation. That's That's Jim Crow with Israeli characteristics. Is that Chaim Crow? The United States supported apartheid South Africa until 1986, when Congress had to override a veto from President Reagan to slap sanctions on the apartheid South African government well after the rest of the world did so. We supply Israel with most of those weapons they are using to indiscriminately bomb Gaza to nothing. We don't want to look at that. That's us. We did that. And it's hard to look at oneself critically. And I think this ties in with my talk with Jared Yates Sexton last week. And it's toxic masculinity, right? It's groups of mostly men refusing to look inward, admit their own wrongs, and work to rectify them in a constructive manner. So I don't think the situation will ever get better until America can look itself in the eye and right its wrongs, and until our ally, Israel, can do some reflection on the hard right turn that their government has made and right their wrongs. The aim, the stated aim of the Israeli government in the aftermath of October 7th, the objective of their mission in Gaza is to destroy Hamas. And they may, but they will have killed a lot of innocent people along the way. And unless the occupation ends, and unless the apartheid regime ends, you're just going to keep reproducing the conditions that led to Hamas. It may not be called Hamas next time, but that sentiment will not go away as long as people remain oppressed. That was a lot. That is it for me this time. Again, comments, please. What did I get wrong? What did I get right? Help me be better. Thank you so much for listening to the Who's Left podcast. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers. Until next time, love each other, Indiana.